Hello and welcome to Pop Screen, listeners, part of the Geek Show podcast network. We are that part of the Geek Show that likes to look at the good, the bad and the ridiculous of movies, either starring, by or about pop stars. No, the podcast covers a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I write for horrified.com, the British horror website, as well as thegeekshow.co.uk, where I review films and do our classic Doctor Who coverage on Patreon. I've been joined this week by
Rob Simpson, site editor of The Geek Show. And as of Thursday, whenever it was, podcaster for hire. So if you've got another podcast, come and get me. Because I featured recently on my favourite film podcast. That was fun.
Yes, that's a good show. And I'm not sure of the running order that I've just decided on, but its host, Gav Smith, will be either coming up or will have already aired an episode, depending on when this goes out.
And do check his podcast, because both of us are on it. Graham's doing Mulholland Drive, and I did 1998 Chiller, although I never really got why they called them that. The Ringu.
What film would you say deserves the name Chiller more? I would say something like The Great White Silence is a better...
It's got to be a cold movie.
Yeah.
It just makes sense otherwise.
It was one of our new genres that we invented at Cinema Eclectica, was the silent, cold movie. There's quite a few of them, really.
Yes, there are. Especially that weird Canadian one, the very, very original found footage movie.
Which one was that?
About some some old mining place in Canada.
Oh boy, yeah.
Old footage has been reconstituted and put into this documentary.
Dawson City Frozen Time, yeah, that's a very good movie. And as you say, a literal found footage movie.
Yes, you can't question who's filming that. Why is this going on? Why are they still filming? Something's killing them off. Nothing like that. No questions.
Why are these things buried in a Yukon gold mine? That is the main question that film leaves you with.
Yes.
But the subject of today's pop screen is not Dawson City Frozen Time, although it may feature a 1900s pop star in there. I haven't done the research. The subject of today's episode is the kindest, bravest, warmest, most wonderful film I've seen in my life. It also stars one of the few pop stars who could be said to have had a proper film career, Frank Sinatra. Sinatra's recording and acting careers were both so staggeringly successful, it might be hard to recall which one came first. There is a definite answer, which we'll reveal at the end of the show, but for now, we've decided to tackle one of the more controversial items on his CV, John Frankenheimer's 1962 film, The Manchurian Candidate, adapted from the novel by Richard Condon, who once said, "Every book I've ever written has been about abuse of power, so ring-a-ding-ding, I guess."
Yes.
This was the film you and I bonded over to some extent, wasn't it, in the very early days of Eclectica?
It was, yeah. That was the first time I watched it, and it was sort of for me anyway, it was a hello, John Frankenheimer, because before that, he just one of many, many names. But after that, it's a real interesting name. I can't remember what we bonded over because it was so long ago. Like the last week feels like a lifetime. So
yes, yeah.
You're asking me a very long time ago there.
Yeah, listeners, in case you're wondering when me and Rob met, it was Tuesday. But yeah, I saw it and thought it was terrific and subversive as well. And I think I got very attached to films that I felt were subversive when I was a teenager, partly because I was a teenager and it's what you like. But I also had like grown up thinking that films were very sort of mainstream and dull as a form of entertainment. And I was excited to see things that put something more dangerous into that sphere, particularly when it stars someone like Frank Sinatra, who I would not have
Yeah.
associated with this kind of material.
I can relate with that because, well, I think it happens to everybody. You think it's like when you find music, when you're a kid, you just listen to the chart music. You think, oh, the chart music, it's fine. It's fine. It's not really me, but it's fine. And the same is true of music, a movie, sorry. And you think of the 1960s, when you're a kid anyway, when you're a kid, you don't know anything about the swinging 60s or anything like this. You just think the 60s is very establishment era.
Yeah, it's your dance music, isn't it? That's the association. Yeah.
And this is both that and very much not that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the assets it has is that Sinatra is one of the few people at his level of musical celebrity who is just immediately credible as an actor. You just immediately buy him in this role.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he really acts. He's just himself, really.
It's a star persona, but it's a star persona that I think is more portable than, I mean, to take an obvious example, than someone like Dean Martin's.
I mean, even the content of his songs, he's quite genuine, down to earth. Even though some of the lyrics of his songs have aged quite badly, as you'd expect for somebody in that era, and keeping a token black guy in your troupe kind of dated badly too. But you know, as far as that era, he was very, very genuine.
Although Sammy Davis Jr., I should say, is the only member of the Rat Pack who I really value. Is it solely because of that amazing 6-minute cameo he does in Sweet Charity? No, just mostly.
It helps. It helps.
Yeah. I know you're not a fan of musicals, Rob, but that is absolutely incredible. The song is great, and he looks like he's wearing stuff that was rejected from Andre 3000's wardrobe for being too bright.
Is that possible? The man dresses as a pea. He's an odd human being, Andre 3000.
So yeah, I should say before we go on that kind of, I don't know what you'd call it. I mean, it is technically jazz, but it reminds you that jazz is a broad field. That kind of Vegas crooner stuff is the one style of music that I have total antipathy for. I just cannot get along with it at all.
Yeah, I agree. I don't like it stylistically whatsoever, but I don't know. There's just something about it. It's timeless. It's absolutely timeless, and it's always and will forever be good taste, I guess, is the word that the phrase that I'm looking for.
It has an
not
aura
in the sense of
class around it, I think. Yeah.
Not in the sense of you have a good taste if you listen to this sort of music. I mean, I introduced myself to somebody and say, "Hello, my name is Rob. I like noise punk." And people are like, "Oh, this guy's weird." If I go up and say, "Hello, I'm Rob, and I like Frank Sinatra," I think, hang on, he's a good egg. Keep him around. It's just that sort of perception. I think it's always been there, really.
Yeah, I think it has. I mean, I think I will put my cards on the table and say part of my distaste for this music is I always associate it with Michael Parkinson's Radio 2 show, which always used to be on in my house. And he had this maddening running tick of complaining about how the music nowadays, it's just, the lyrics don't mean anything. They don't write them with feeling anymore. And then he'd play some Rat Pack stuff and it would start with like, skibbity dip bap whip bap bidoop scoop bap boop biddly bong. Wow, they really don't write them like that anymore, do they?
I know this isn't really about his music, but the one that really bugged me, it's a meme that was prevalent a few years ago. How it said in the 1960s, people dressed like Sinatra and the Rat Pack, and people now dress like I don't know, kids at the local playground getting off the head on white lightning.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you can't equate those things together. That's a really odd meme there.
Yeah, I always there's a whole sort of subgenre of memes that are like targeted at people complaining about the fact that an imaginary version of the past no longer exists. My favorite was always like, oh, back in the day, you know, you had pop stars like Freddie Mercury, and look at what they'd have now. And it's like, yeah, Freddie Mercury would be horrified if he saw what pop stars were like now. Imagine Freddie Mercury seeing Lil Nas X. Oh, he'd be distraught. He'd be clutching his pearls.
To be fair to those people, I don't think the establishment was very pro Freddie Mercury, to be honest.
No,
he was a bit of an outlier, really,
yeah.
wasn't he?
And as you sort of as you remember an era, you conflate it all into one. You get rid of the conflict in it. It's like when you mentioned thinking about Sinatra in terms of the 60s, like Sinatra was all going around in the 60s saying the Beatles were a bunch of seditious long hairs and their music was un-American. And it's like,
well, yes, they are British, but
yeah.
Scousers about as un-American as you can get, really. So well done, Sinatra.
So yeah, it's very strange that when people think back, they forget that these musical genres were kind of antagonistic towards each other, and it just all gets wrapped up into, as you say, into good taste.
It's weird how when people think of tribalism, think of, I don't know, Los Angeles rap versus New York rap.
Yeah.
Not Frank Sinatra having a go at those boys from Liverpool. You never think of that sort of thing, do you?
I mean, I'm as guilty as anyone else. If you asked me what the difference between a mod and a rocker was, I would struggle. But you know, massive gang wars were fought over it in its day.
They had Vespers, one of them.
Yeah.
That's about as far as I could commit.
Maybe that's what it was. Maybe the rockers were just unusually opposed to scooters.
Yeah, they kind of are annoying though.
They are, yeah.
Just buzzing around. Oof.
I think we've picked a side here.
Yeah, not the one with the Vespers. I don't know what that is, but I'm sure somebody could answer that question.
Yeah. But yeah, so as we say, seeing that person who was complaining about the Beatles being just a racket and you couldn't hear the lyrics in the context of something as dangerous as this is quite a ride.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear that from like past generations about something as universally lauded as the Beatles. But
exactly,
time is a weird mistress, I guess. It is very subversive, really, because fundamentally what you're talking about is communism in America and the way that manifests, really. And it's subversive in casting as well. I know this wasn't intentional, but I can't remember her name now. It's Angela Lansbury.
Lansbury, yes.
Plays, I don't know the name of her son character, Ray, in this, but there's only a few years difference there. Laurence Harvey. She's only a few years older than Laurence Harvey there. And she plays his mum, and he's been basically conditioned as a sleeper assassin, essentially. Yeah, and it's a weird perception thing, isn't it?
It's an odd thing, yeah, and it's even, I mean, it works perfectly now in a strange way, because you see Angela Lansbury and you think, oh, Jessica Fletcher, Murder, She Wrote. It's like, it becomes impossible to imagine a time when Angela Lansbury was not a nice old lady. But yeah, I can't imagine what people at the time made of it.
I mean, personally, I can never picture a time when she was actually young. It's kind of mind-blowing to see her in roles like this.
Completely.
And
yeah,
it's subversive as well, again, in that using that time framing. Now you think of nice old Angela Lansbury. She's Mrs. Fletcher. She goes around and death follows her. Or she's sort of an elderly statesman in British acting. And in this, she is horrid.
She's absolutely vile, isn't she? Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. She's the big bad, essentially, to use that term. But
It's interesting, yeah, because if you're trying to sort of map this onto real life political figures, I mean, you have to tackle the fact that Raymond Shaw is quite a lot like John F. Kennedy. And
It has that look-alike there, yeah.
they have a military background. They're like young, sort of fairly liberal candidates who seem to, as you say, even have a facial resemblance. And I think part of that's how it switches on you, because one of John F. Kennedy's major electoral liabilities at the time was his father, Joseph Kennedy, who was the most horrendous shit. Like his big moment on the national stage was as a businessman in the 1930s who was loudly insisting that we should sign a non-aggression pact with the Nazis. So yeah, a total dick.
As well as sort of running through time as well, there's a likeness between the puppet head who they're trying to install as president and figures through history, especially contemporary history. It's just one of these weird little bits of subversion, which it doesn't get less subversive over time. I think it's actually got more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And now I think partly because of something else that we'll get onto, but when you see James Gregory playing John Iselin, Raymond Shaw's father, you think, all right, he's going to be the villain because he's positioned as the Joseph Kennedy figure in this allegory. And he's on air and he's like ranting about lists of communists that have infested American public life. So
he can never get his numbers straight either at that first interaction.
Yeah, he can't. It's that's another sort of real world political element, because he's basically meant to be Joseph McCarthy, right down to the fact that he is drunk off his face for most of these rants. So they've given you a very good red herring. They've given you two of the most monstrous political figures in recent American history at the time, combined into one. And that maneuvers Lansbury as Eleanor into place. You don't suspect her as the main villain because, come on, this guy's Joseph Kennedy meets Joe McCarthy. Who's worse than that?
Always the quiet ones.
It really is. Yeah, yeah.
Although I don't think she's actually that quiet in this movie, but yeah.
She's very ranty, yes, particularly towards the end.
A particular quality I like. Anybody who she doesn't like, she accuses of being a communist, which is a reach, I guess.
It's true, yeah. But, you know, another thing that hasn't really aged about the film, I think.
Yeah, more relevant over time.
Yeah, nowadays, maybe she'd be a best-selling self-help author. But she's a very, very ominous figure. And I think Lansbury, I don't want to say she steals the show. There's a lot of good performances in it. But if I had to pick one that's iconic, it's probably this, right?
Yeah, because basically. A character who is the mother next door on the white picket fence, dressed exactly as you'd expect her to be. So the very upstanding, stately mum character. But she instigates some really, really horrible things. I mean, there's plot nuances that make it a little bit more complicated later on, but she is just horrifically manipulative in everything that she does. Every little gesture she does, everything she's done is designed to mess with her son's head. It's just really, really nasty. I mean, there's horror movie villains which don't do things as insidious as what she pulls off here.
Yeah, it was based on, there was an insinuation in the book, I think, that there was some very heavy sexual abuse in Raymond Shaw's past, which obviously is like absolutely unspeakable in this era of Hollywood. But it's implied about as strongly as you get. The kiss that Lansbury gives Laurence Harvey is not very, very maternal.
I can't recall that scene, to be honest. When does that happen?
It's right towards the end where she's sending him out to, do his final duty to be the assassin.
Yes.
There's a kiss between them that is really quite creepily lingering.
Well, maybe that is the only way they could really pay homage to that aspect of the book, because they wouldn't have let it in a much more straightforward way. It had to be a bit more sneaky with it, which is the story of so many movies of that era. They tried to sneak little references, little touches, which maybe the standards upholders of the time, I guess you'd call them, would never really have any truck with.
And censorship-wise, there's some stuff in here that is still pretty disturbing, I think.
Surprisingly violent too.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, but in a few instances, very, very violent. Not just suggestive, literal. There's gore in this movie.
I think whenever you see this film exerted on television, they always go for the scene, the flashback scene or the nightmare scene, depending on how you want to read it, where Ray Shaw witnesses someone being brainwashed into killing one of their fellow soldiers, which means this is probably the most replayed, like, headshot, the most replayed sort of splatter of brains, outside of the Zapruder footage, appropriately enough.
Yeah, it is. It's a weird scene as well. It's horrific, but it's so matter of fact. The brainwashed, and it's presented in a weird way, especially I think first there's a version of it where there's lots of black women in flowery floral dresses.
Yes, yeah.
And they're always referred to the person doing the brainwashing as ma'am, even though it's I don't want to say Chinese, but that's a bit loose when you got a character in this called Chun Jin, who is played by an American actor called Henry. Names. He's not American, let's just say.
Okay, yeah.
Henry Silver, I think, is the name of the actor.
Yes, Henry Silver, yeah.
But yeah, it alternates from the very, very middle class, very upstanding floral dresses and whatnot, and cuts to a lot of military leaders. And the way it's put together, but the way that the brainwashed interact with it. So, can you just get past it? Oh, yeah, thank you very much. I'll just squeeze past here. Oh no, am I in your way? Oh, let me move your chair. And then it shoots the guy in the head.
It doesn't even cut to the military leaders, does it? It pans around, and the extras sitting there slowly change from, as you say, these very nice ladies in floral dresses to a series of military leaders. It's an absolutely bizarre scene.
It takes a while before you realise that it is the same instance. It's just the perception of who characters' eyes we are seeing it through. It changes from moment to moment there.
Yeah. One minor thing that I was trying to work out, I tried to work out if this was the first film that had a pre-credit sequence, which it doesn't seem to be. Bond started the same year, and James Bond films are obviously famous for very elaborate pre-credit sequences. So I don't think it is. I think I would have seen some reference to this being the first if it was. But that did surprise me. I'm used to films of this era starting with like a long playbill of who's in it and who made it. But you get that first scene with Kennedy at war, with Raymond Shaw at war, before any of the opening credits have rolled.
Yeah, and that's part of the ruse, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Where they have this shared memory which has been planted, but none of it happens. So as the movie starts, we are introduced to this fabricated memory. And it couldn't have started any other way, really. That's essential as far as setting the stall of what's going through the mind of these brainwashes.
I mean, nowadays you realise it's a false memory for a very different reason, because you've got a character based on John F. Kennedy, and all of his men are teasing him about how he doesn't want to go on shore leave and pick up girls. And you think, yeah, that's definitely not John F. Kennedy. I don't buy that for 1 second.
Yeah, he was a saucy boy.
He was, yeah. You know, if ethics committees had got hold of him, I think he'd get a firm slap on the wrist for some of the stuff he did.
He did, but he gave the world the sexiest happy birthday song.
Yeah, yeah.
So by proxy, so fair enough. That's his historical legacy.
That's it, yes. Yeah, there's an urban myth about this film that after the Kennedy assassination, Sinatra pressured the studio to pull it completely, which isn't true. It did go out of circulation, but largely because it's pre-VHS. Movies remained in circulation in the sense that, they would remain available to show at cinemas. And nobody wanted to watch a movie about a political assassination after 1963.
Yeah, which is understandable. What I
Yeah.
mean? But it's also really a perverse angle to take. If it was taken out of circulation now, if a movie was controversial now, that means you take it off all the streaming platforms, video on demands, DVD, don't show on TV.
It's pretty hard to enforce. Yeah.
You take it out of a lot of the things there, but then maybe showed it on TV once or twice, maybe.
Perhaps, yeah, I don't know.
And
I think no, it would
take
probably
it off,
still
take
be
it.
too new. Yeah.
But yeah, it's very strange thing to suggest because it's not like movies were regularly cycled. Once it was off cinema, it was gone effectively.
Yeah.
It wasn't until VHS where pulling it actually meant something.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't until VHS when pulling it became unenforceable, really, because as soon as it's gone on sale, someone's got a copy. But that wasn't the case back then.
Bootlegs and whatnot and what have you.
Yeah. So, yeah, it wasn't quite that, but it does feel unusually predictive of the way that things would go. I mean, this is released in the same year as the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is a pretty hairy time to be putting out political thrillers about the Cold War.
Yeah, especially it doesn't exactly paint it in positive lights either. The suggestion that well-to-do middle-class women effectively have huge roles to play in it. And manipulating on a micro level, so it's not just where missiles are, who's going to get bombed, nicey, hide under tables at school and have these weird routines.
Yes,
that was the reality. This movie is suggesting a really harsh future in which the political elite, I guess you'll call them, were manipulating and sowing seeds of discontent and assassinating people. It's a really, really cynical worldview that they're establishing in this movie.
Yeah, and I think part of the cynicism of it is that it is just such a whirlpool that nobody in it, with the exception of Bennett, the Sinatra character, has any kind of a sincere motivation. I was trying to work out if you could boil down the moral of the Manchurian Candidate to one sentence, what would it be? And I think it would be something like anti-communism is a communist plot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because it is kind of messy politically, isn't it? As far as the goals of Angela Lansbury.
And I wonder whether that's part of how they got away with it, is that by the end, you feel like you were uncomfortable saying whether this is a left-wing or a right-wing movie. It feels subversive, we've established that, but as for saying what side it's on, you would have to follow it very closely. And I think a lot of moral guardians will have given up.
It's very ambiguous. I think it's quite clever in that regard.
It's worth wondering too, what did Richard Condon know? Because as far as I can tell, he was basically a popular fiction writer. I can't see any sort of insinuation that he might have known about the psychiatric programs that the CIA were setting up with people like Dr. Ewan Cameron, where they really did believe you could just wipe someone's mind clean and start again. So if he didn't know, it has to be one of the weirdest lucky guesses in literary history.
Well, it wouldn't be the first. There's been some pretty good predictions. I mean, hell, the Simpsons predicted Donald Trump would be president, so why
Yes.
can't this guy get, this sort of thing?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's unusually specific. I don't think it's impossible to get that sort of a depth, a jump on the political classes and what they're doing or not doing. I just think it was a hotbed at the time, really, where nothing was off the cards. The paranoia was off the charts, and it was just a scary time, I imagine. And when the times are scary, as we can see now with the way the populism is going, people make some huge leaps when they feel threatened.
Yeah, I suppose maybe the reason why JFK is on my mind so much as I talk about this is because he was scheduled to come back, wasn't he? QAnon were insisting that him and his son were going to come back and endorse Donald Trump last week, and tragically that seems not to have happened.
Yeah, pity for QAnon. They seem so onto something there.
They'll get it one of these days, Rob. One of these days, we'll be groveling to them, apologizing for ever doubting this stuff.
Yeah, but the fact that a movement like that can come about with some of this mad stuff that comes out of their mouths, it just shows political instability, gets people's minds all running. And the 60s was pretty unstable as far as political systems,
I think one of the fun things about looking back at this era of conspiracy theorizing is the time when you had to do serious work to even just be able to guess at some of this stuff, because it wasn't like now where you just have to open Facebook and you're told like about 50 different complete lies about what's in the COVID vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, people who are worried that the government's going to follow them with the COVID vaccine, you should basically give up completely. But that is what it is. But yeah, I mean, you get people from that era who seem to be a bit more on the nose. They seem to have like more whistleblowers around them, and more people who, defected, I guess would be the right term. So there's a lot of things around and circling around, and lots of capital ideas and whatnot, rather than just mad people on Twitter saying things.
Yes,
getting a lot of people to retweet them. There was people who had some sort of background there, so maybe the original author knew somebody who knew something. So who knows?
Conceivable. Yeah, I mean, I just feel like paranoia in general is one of those things that's more fun when it's difficult. There's no fun in making this stuff too easy.
Yeah, paranoia now is very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't really be more cynical than the people who are actually in charge.
No, I don't want to get into that because it's bloody depressing.
Yes. But we've talked about Lansbury. We've talked a bit about Sinatra. I think Laurence Harvey is very interesting in this. He always had a reputation, somewhat unfairly, as being kind of a lightweight actor. But I think, firstly, that's very good at selling Raymond Shaw as the kind of empty vessel that the machine behind him needs him to be. And secondly, I think the bits in this way has to be sort of anguished and traumatized are actually perfectly convincing.
And he's everything he needs to be, but it's just the perception and the way that character is described by other people. It might have been fine then, but now it's really harsh. When his character reaches his resolution of his character arc, it's poor Raymond, poor friendless Raymond. It's like, wow. Standards for how you judge a person have really changed over the years, because that's harsh.
That is rubbing it in a bit, isn't it? I mean, cut the guy some slack. Yes.
And another time he's described as about as unlikable a person as Frank Sinatra has ever met. I thought, no, that's not fair. He's for me, he's depicted as a person who's torn a lot of separate directions between who he is and what he wants, and these manipulations, and balance all of that. For an actor who is thought of as subpar or average, I think isn't fair, really. He does a lot of, he basically does all, like the majority of the heavy lifting here.
I mean, I haven't watched everything Harvey's done, but the things that I've watched have given me the impression that he got that reputation just because of bias against comedy, that he tended to do a lot of light romantic comedies. So everyone assumed that he must be a crap actor, which is sadly something that people still do.
It's Gene Wilder said that a lot of the times, and he had a famous quote how he had a pop at the Oscars and similar award body to looking down on comedy acting as lesser acting, which just isn't
absolutely
fair.
Yeah. Was it
But
Mel Brooks who said dying's easy, comedy's hard?
Yeah, making somebody laugh is the hardest thing in the world. You know, it's underrated as a form of acting, and yeah, he's very good at this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think he does a great job of being effectively the anchor in a movie, because without him effectively playing this nuanced and hopeless guy, I'm not saying it in the same terms that, you know, the movie does.
This hopeless, friendless tool played by this lightweight actor.
He has no chance in life, really, and it's communicated really well by the actor, I think, because I don't think it would have worked without him being as good as he is.
I remember when Jonathan Demme made his remake of this in the 2000s, that did kind of impress on me how lucky they were to get Laurence Harvey, because the Raymond Shaw role in the remake is played by Liev Schreiber, who is an actor that I know a lot of people like. I personally have never quite seen the appeal, but would you vote for Liev Schreiber? You know, wouldn't you be slightly concerned about the fact that he looks exactly like Richard Nixon?
And he just looks like nasty and violent. You know, he plays all these violent characters, and, you know, you get a perception of the way people look. So he's going to beat me up if I don't vote for him.
I mean, that might be effective.
Well, it worked. No, I can't make that comment.
The beauty is it works with anyone you're thinking of, listeners.
I can't say the country because they will, you know, murder me. Just leave it ambiguous. Fill in the blanks yourself.
Yes. The remake is kind of forgettable, although the other thing that I thought was interesting is, I mean, we've been talking a lot about the Kennedy family and Joseph McCarthy as models for this. Meryl Streep played the Angela Lansbury role in the remake and said that she looked at a lot of like male political power brokers. She was very inspired by Dick Cheney when she played that role. And yet, as soon as it came out, literally everyone said, oh, she's playing Hillary Clinton.
Nuance is a thing, isn't it? But I do think that's a better casting of the role. I do love Angela Lansbury, but she's too young for that role. She's horrifyingly menacing and insidious, but a bit too young.
Do you know who Sinatra wanted casting? And I can't decide whether this is so mad it's genius or just so mad.
Go on.
Lucille Ball.
Her name's not familiar.
Famously one of America's first big sitcom stars with I Love Lucy.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, that's really weird.
But you never know. Sink or swim. Sometimes these... you use the term colorblind, but that's not what I'm getting at here. But colorblind casting.
Yes.
Yeah. Sanity blind casting sometimes works.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
probably not there though, but...
I credit Sinatra for coming up with someone who you definitely would not have suspected. I mean, Angela Lansbury being behind it all is a big twist, but Lucille Ball being behind it is cuckoo.
Yeah. Well, but she is excellent, generally speaking.
Yeah. There's a strange vein of comedy talent in this film. I mean, we've mentioned Harvey and his career associations, but George Axelrod, the screenwriter, wrote a lot of films that I think are tonally quite different, like Breakfast at Tiffany's and The 7-Year Itch.
It's a bit of a leap from that to this, yeah.
Yeah.
Huge leap, in fact.
Yeah, it's very odd. And I would have to assume that's Frankenheimer's doing, really. I mean, he's got a bit of that wiseacre sensibility. He could probably see a novel like Condon's and think, yeah, I think a comedian could probably get out what's crazy and scary about this.
Find a relatable angle about it. Because I think that's one of the greater successes of this. When you talk about political thrillers,
yeah,
they're kind of tedious, they're kind of aloof, they keep you at arm's length, really. Hard to like. There's very, very few examples where I don't think that's true. I think like 3 Days of the Condor, like stuff like that might be pretty much the extent of it by my hugely cynical opinion. But this, I don't think it is that. It's quite down to earth and quite human, and it sees the story for what it is, and maybe that's the comedian's influence.
It could be, yeah, and I think you have to credit Sinatra a bit for it as well, because he is very relatable as a guy who has gone through some horrible stuff and is seeing the possibility for even more horrible stuff unfold.
Yeah, I know his reputation kind of makes it hard a point to relate to, but as a screen persona, he does do good everyman.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, he's not like leading man handsome. I know that's blasphemy to some people,
but it's true, not, isn't it? Yeah, he's a very strange kind of pin-up.
He was a pin-up? Wow.
Oh yeah, in his early days, that was his reputation. You know, he was, ironically, considering his later comments about the Beatles, he was the guy that teenage girls were screaming over.
Yeah, I could see that sort of legacy. But just when you think of the word pin-up and then you put Frank Sinatra next to those words, it doesn't. There's something in my head which is rebelling against it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. He's not a good-looking guy, but he's charismatic as all hell.
Oh yeah, entirely. Which was the whole point of the Rat Pack, really. That was a hugely charismatic group of singers.
Yeah. I found out a bit about the Rat Pack actually while I was doing research for this, because like I say, I'm not a fan of that kind of music. So this has been a very researchy kind of pop screen episode. The thing that I didn't appreciate is that Sinatra went to Las Vegas and formed the Rat Pack for the same reason that most other singers go to Las Vegas, which is that his career was really stalling. You know,
wow.
This was in the this was in the early 50s too. He'd had a good run in the 40s, but there was a consensus around like 1951, 1952 that maybe the bandwagon was running out of steam. So he went to Vegas because they do residencies there and it's good kind of guaranteed work. And for once, going to Vegas turned out to revive his career and make him a major player in popular music again.
That's wild, really, because it's one of those terms, isn't it? Like Watergate, everything is something gay. It's just become sort of a parlance of modern language. And the Rat Pack, there's so many variations on that concept of a group of people. Like the hot young things of the time. It became sort of a shorthand for it. So I think that it was sort of a last throw of the dice.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
As throws of the dice go, a pretty good result.
Oh yeah. He completely. I was going to make a gambling metaphor there, but I don't know enough about it to make one, so I just back out gracefully.
Yes. I think by the time we were growing up, Sinatra's reputation was just as someone who was like bulletproof famous, as someone who would never, ever stop being famous, which is part of what really surprised me about that anecdote, even though it's obvious when you think about it. Why else does a singer go to Vegas?
It's just one of those legacy names, like your Elvises, like your Stevie Wonders, like your Elton Johns.
Yeah.
Just always, everybody will always know about them. I'd like to think so anyway.
Yeah, and of course, Elvis and Elton John also had their lengthy Vegas residencies that did plenty of good for them. But yeah.
Nice little consistency there of the random names effect.
Yeah. So, the Manchurian Candidate, any final thoughts before we close off?
I think I have to highlight this because it's it might be a hard recommend for younger people. I know recommending like a political thriller from the 1960s starring Frank Sinatra is a bit of a reach to recommend to anybody or under like 40 maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
But nonetheless, it's some of the language used in it was a bit. I never noticed it in the first watch. It was a bit whoa there. That's a bit full on, as well
They
as
are, yeah, a bit sort of obsessed with the fact that the Chinese characters are Chinese.
Yeah, well, it wasn't so much that. It was when I can't remember his name now. I'm really bad with names. I'm sorry, but this is not good podcasting when you forget the names of everybody. The brainwashed guy.
Ray Shaw, yeah.
Ray Shaw, sorry, yeah, Ray Shaw. When his character gets married,
Mm.
they get back into his flat, and one of the phrases that comes out of his mouth is, be like a good housewife, would you? And it's like, whoa.
Yes.
If you said that to somebody now, you'd get a swift knee to the nuts a good half dozen times.
Yes, absolutely.
And it just feels really awkward looking at it with modern eyes, little bits like that, as well as you couldn't call it colorblind casting, but for the wrong reasons. Well, maybe. Actually, I don't know.
No, I don't think so. Let me just look this guy up. It's an actor called Key Daig, who, an actor of Anglo-Egyptian Sudanese ancestry. So, okay, you've got 3 ethnicities you could cast him as, and you've hit none of them.
He's a little bit closer than Italian American. so the closer, the getting there.
Yes, yeah.
Either or, I think they're still better than Mickey Rooney. There's like a line of really bad racially blind casting, and this is probably at the more tasteful end, historically speaking.
Maybe we can blame George Axelrod for it. It's because he had a part in Breakfast at Tiffany's as well. So, maybe he's the con factor. But yeah, I agree. I mean, they're not cast according to like modern sensibilities, but equally they're not like loudly stereotyped. It's not.
No.
There's
a scale, and this is fine. I don't think it's going to offend anybody watching it. That the comment about the housewife probably will, but it's such a throwaway little utterance that you probably forget about it soon after you finished it. But when you're watching it, you'll be steamed.
And also, the guy is like a brainwashed murderer, so it's like it's not the worst thing he does.
No, not by a long shot. But yeah, I mean, I really like it, generally speaking.
Yeah.
I think it takes some bold risks. The way I don't know if we want to bring up the ending, but the way it does end, I think, is a particularly bold risk in that era of American cinema, especially, where I don't know whether it's fair to say, but they always tried to err on the sort of the happy ending, try to give things a bit more of a positive end, like a point to break, a positive end to finish on. And this, no, it's not. It is positive in the sense of the threat is defeated, but it does it in such a downbeat way.
And that is crucial to it, isn't it? As you say, the threat is defeated. I wonder whether it's one of those sort of Hays Code rules where the reason why film noirs are so depressing is because the Hays Code said that no criminal character can get away with it. So if you're making a crime movie, what you've got in practice is a narrative that follows your lead character along for 80 minutes until he dies horribly at the end. Yeah. And I think there's something similar about the Manchurian Candidate. It's like, yeah, the day is saved and the right people are punished for it, but it does it in a way that reminds you that there is still a serious human cost to that.
Yeah, and it's just this wave, I guess you'd call it, of the threat. The actual core at the heart of what made this happen is still out there. It's still a threat. So maybe at the time they considered a Manchurian Candidate too. I don't know. It certainly leaves those pieces on the table for that idea to be picked up.
It's just occurred to me, when we did Cinema Eclectica, we used to have a thing where we would recommend a movie to watch with a film we were reviewing as a double bill.
Yes.
This would be a great double bill with Secret Honor.
I've heard of that, but not seen that one.
Secret Honor is great. I mean, it's the most anomalous Robert Altman film because rather than having a cast of thousands, it's got a cast of one.
Yes, I thought it was that one.
Yeah, but a fascinating film that imagines Richard Nixon's last night in the White House and the theory he has as to why his downfall happened is the sort of thing that you can imagine Angela Lansbury's character in The Manchurian Candidate nodding along with.
Yeah, entirely. I mean, the one last thing I will say is it made me incredibly interested in the work of John Frankenheimer. He's a journeyman, but I think there's a
really interesting one. Yeah,
there's a lot more energy and sort of fire in the belly than you'd usually use for describing a journeyman director.
I agree. Yeah, and I think one of the things he had that is kind of a rarity is that he was making films in the 50s. Well, he started in 57, but that was his only 1950s film. He was making films in the 60s that feel subversive, things like this, and Seconds, which is great. And then as Hollywood started to liberalize and become grittier in the 70s and 80s, he actually rolled with the punches. He kept going. He did things like 52 Pickup, which is an astonishingly sleazy movie. It's the sort of thing that Abel Ferrara would watch and sort of think, oh, I need a shower after this.
Hold on. He made Seconds within the Hays Code. Bloody hell, he had nuts. Huge nuts to do stuff like that. The movie about Rock Hudson, who was he was a closet gay in Hollywood in a time when it was illegal to be gay, about a man changing his face. He did that under the Hays Code. Bravo to him.
Yeah. I love Seconds, and I love the story that he wanted the face swapping operation in it to be like a shot of a real plastic surgery operation. And it is actually, but he had to film it himself because 3 camera operators passed out trying to do it.
Yeah, you got to respect the fact that he did this, the fact that he did Seconds. He's a fantastic filmmaker, John Frankenheimer.
Yeah.
Fair play to him. Completely fair play to him.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Yeah.
End on a high.
Absolutely, yes. And if you'd like to hear more of what we do, obviously you can follow our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're on all of those at TGS_The Geek Show. But you can also go to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show, where you can also get access to our other movie podcast, Director's Lottery, where every month we take a randomly selected director and review 2 of their works. I think John Frankenheimer is on that list, and I think it would be great if he came up one day. But until next week, when we'll be back with more Pop Screen, I've been Graham.
And I have been Rob.
And I'm Edison Graham, just bursting in here to say that I realise I completely forgot to resolve that mystery from the start of the show about whether Frank Sinatra was a singer or an actor first, and the answer is both. His first album came out in 1946, but his first film appearance was in Las Vegas Nights in 1941. So you'd think it's the film career, except he was only cast in Las Vegas Nights because he could sing. He was playing a singer, so which came first, the singer or the actor? Both, it turns out. And now you can annoy people greatly by asking that question and then revealing that it's a trick. And that's your lot for this week.